$300 million. It's way too much pressure. I can't handle that. The man shouted in anguish and then ran off somewhere. He is the in-house interpreter for the company I work for. On this day, we were heading to the designated meeting room for a business discussion with a major international corporation. Accompanied by the president, Mr. Armstrong, and Kevin, the head of sales. I guess he overheard Mr. Armstrong say something from the back seat. If we pull this off, a $300 million revenue boost might just be within reach. Seeing the interpreter clutch his stomach from nerves, I suggested we stop at a convenience store for a quick restroom break. But the moment he returned to the car from the store, he started crying and ran off. With a determined look, I told Mr. Armstrong and the others, who appeared deeply concerned. Please, let me handle this. This was the beginning of my story, one where I'd take on responsibilities far beyond my usual secretarial duties. My name is Brandon, and I'm currently 30 years old. I work as an executive assistant to the president at X Corporation. My job involves managing Mr. Armstrong's schedule, arranging conference rooms and personnel as needed, and assisting with anything he requires. At times, I also serve as a driver, transporting not only Mr. Armstrong but also other executives. I've gotten used to driving since I got my license, though I remember feeling pretty nervous about chauffeuring senior executives at first. I've gone on road trips with friends a few times, but there's a bit more pressure when it's the senior executives. One day, after completing a research assignment requested by Mr. Armstrong, I headed to his office. Excuse me. As I opened the door, I saw Mr. Armstrong sitting there with two other colleagues in suits. They were gathered around a central chair, talking intently, but as soon as I spoke, they all turned to look at me. Oh, Brandon. The one who said that was Kevin, the head of sales. With a relaxed tone, he greeted me with a casual wave of his hand. Ah, hello Brandon. Timothy, the company's interpreter, muttered this with a slight bow, his eyes darting around nervously. I gave a nod to everyone and began preparing coffee. Mr. Armstrong, Kevin, and Timothy were a team that Mr. Armstrong personally assembled for this important upcoming meeting. They seemed to have been discussing their plans, as this was one of many recent gatherings in the president's office. Mr. Armstrong, regarding this part of the document. Yes, it might be best to revise that section. As I poured the coffee, the soothing aroma seemed to relax the tense atmosphere a bit. I set a cup in front of each of them and took a step back to quietly observe. I'm just the president's assistant, so I'll likely never be involved in a make-or-break meeting like this. I take my responsibilities seriously, but these three must be dealing with pressure at a level far beyond mine. My life is pretty peaceful. I work during the week, and on weekends, I buy daily necessities, watch movies, or wander aimlessly around the shopping mall. I don't have a partner, but I get to enjoy my free time doing what I like, and I kind of enjoy that freedom. Sorry, I'm spending my next day off with my wife. Some of my friends have started getting married, and while I sometimes feel a bit lonely when they turn down invitations to hang out, I don't really find myself wishing I had a partner. I've been able to live a fulfilling life, appreciating the simple joy of feeling content without any major complaints. By the way, from my perspective, Kevin is someone with a gentle, easygoing demeanor. Kevin, could you please check this? Sure, it looks great. I appreciate your attention to detail as always. I've seen him interacting with his team several times, and he never loses his warm smile. It's not a forced smile, every word he says genuinely feels like it comes from the heart. The sales department he leads also seems to share a harmonious, trouble-free atmosphere. The entire team embodies that same gentle, positive vibe Kevin brings. However, he's not entirely without ambition or dedication to his work. Kevin's passion for each task is contagious, motivating his team to bring their best efforts too. I've often looked up to Kevin's work ethic since I joined this company. Each time, I'd think, I need to work harder, just like him. Given how diligent and capable he is, it's no wonder Mr. Armstrong chose to put him on this team directly. With Kevin involved, it feels like things are bound to go smoothly. Our other team member, Timothy, the interpreter, is my peer. I sat near him at our orientation, and at one point, I asked him how he ended up joining the company. When I spoke to him, he reacted with a surprised, "Huh. What's up?" which, in its own way, became a memorable first impression. Apparently, he'd been going to kids' English classes since he was very young. By the time he reached upper elementary school, he'd nearly mastered English, so he started learning other languages too. It was so exciting, watching my knowledge expand and seeing myself improve over time until I could speak fluently without stumbling. Timothy spoke those words, lowering his gaze nostalgically as if reminiscing about that moment. His interest in languages never waned, and eventually, he went to the nation's top university to study linguistics. After graduating, he worked freelance as an interpreter and in language-related roles before joining X Corporation as a full-time employee. Timothy is 29, a little younger than me. Regardless of age, I respect him just as much as I do Kevin because he's incredibly skilled. But even someone as capable as Timothy has his challenges. He's rather shy, prone to anxiety, and has trouble expressing his opinions. I've seen him a few times in discussions with Mr. Armstrong and Kevin, and when asked, "So, Timothy, what do you think?" he often turns red, looking a bit panicked. He stammers, barely able to get a word out. If he's this way around his own colleagues, dealing with unfamiliar clients during business talks must be even more challenging. Apparently, the stress sometimes causes stomach issues. He would murmur, "Excuse me, I need to go to the restroom," and end up hiding out there for about 10 minutes. For this reason, any meetings involving Timothy are scheduled with extra time as a buffer. He keeps stomach medicine on hand at all times, not just in his bag but in his suit pocket too. I've even seen the small medicine case fall out when he leans over occasionally. But his language skills are so exceptional that his nervousness pales in comparison, making him one of the company's top assets. Around the time Timothy joined, the company started handling more international consultations, and his presence gave a noticeable boost to those efforts. Of course, this is only mentioned in his absence to avoid adding to his nerves. Countless discussions took place in the president's office. Finally, the day came for our team to head out for an important business meeting. We planned to meet at the station near the company, and then I'd drive us to the location. "Hey, good morning, Brandon." "Good morning, Mr. Armstrong." Mr. Armstrong arrived 10 minutes early. Kevin joined us around the same time, and I gave them a quick nod. "Thanks for driving today, Brandon." "Yes, I will drive safely." With that, we waited for the last member, Timothy. As Mr. Armstrong and Kevin talked over the meeting, I kept glancing down at my watch. The ticking hands moved closer to the meeting time, and my heartbeat grew louder with each passing second. There was no sign of him at all. I looked around, but I couldn't spot anyone who looked like him. I quickly took out my phone and called, but all I got was the soulless beeping of an unanswered call. "Has Timothy still not shown up?" Mr. Armstrong asked, his face starting to show some concern. Could he be feeling unwell? Or did something happen on his way out of the house? Just as I began to worry about Timothy's whereabouts, I heard a breathless voice. "Sorry for the delay. I'm so sorry for keeping you waiting." Timothy finally showed up, rushing in a few minutes after our meeting time. He explained that he had been hit with severe stomach pains from the nerves, and since he was running, he hadn't noticed my call. Mr. Armstrong, Kevin, and I all sighed in relief. Thank goodness. For a moment, I'd feared we were starting the day off with an unexpected incident, but it looked like we were back on track. "I'm truly sorry." As Mr. Armstrong and Kevin assured him that it was all fine, Timothy kept apologizing repeatedly, his expression heavy with guilt. Our client today was a company with a major international presence. While I kept my eyes on the road, I listened to snippets of conversation between Mr. Armstrong and Kevin, as though I were tuning into a radio show. It's hard to believe this opportunity finally came through. Yes, our persistence paid off. The voices of Mr. Armstrong and Kevin sounded as if they were savoring their joy. It seems they had been reaching out to the other party for years, and now, after much effort, they finally made it happen. Clearly, they were putting everything into this deal. The client company is a true giant in its field. Their representative was scheduled to fly back home today, but they had made time for this meeting right before departure. If this works out, that $300 million revenue goal could actually become a reality. Through the rearview mirror, I could see Mr. Armstrong's excited grin as he clenched his fist with confidence. While Kevin responded with a gentle smile, Timothy in the passenger seat went pale and began to tremble visibly. "Are you all right? Are you sure you're okay?" His shaking was so intense that I could feel it even from where I sat. No matter how hard I try, it keeps slipping into the corner of my vision. I know I should focus, but my eyes keep darting over to it involuntarily. "Yes, I'm fine." "Sorry." He says so, but it's clear he doesn't mean it. His voice and body are both trembling, and his words falter at the end. He's far more nervous now than he was during the discussion at our office. That's just how he is under pressure. A $300 million figure was weighing heavily on his shoulders. "Here, take this if it helps." At a red light, I handed him a honey candy from the stash I kept in the car. I hoped it might offer him a little comfort. "Oh, thank you." Timothy quickly tried to put it in his mouth, but his hands were trembling, and he struggled to open the wrapper. After about 5 minutes, the amber-colored candy finally entered his mouth, only highlighting his nervousness even more. The hard clinking sound of the candy against his teeth continued until it fully melted. While I was curious about the conversation between Mr. Armstrong and Kevin, my mind was mostly occupied by concern for Timothy. When I noticed him leaning forward and clutching his stomach, I decided to stop at a convenience store for a restroom break. "Sorry, I need to use the restroom." Timothy quickly got permission from the cashier before dashing into the restroom. "Do you think he'll be all right?" "He may be struggling now, but I'm sure once we're in the meeting, he'll deliver as usual." Mr. Armstrong and Kevin watched him with worry, but their conversation soon drifted back to the upcoming deal, their excitement palpable. "This is a $300 million business, the highest in our company's history. Let's hope it all goes as planned," they continued, their enthusiasm turning to optimistic projections. Caught up in their high spirits, I couldn't help but join in, getting excited along with them as we chatted away. Our voices filling the car with lively anticipation. As we continued talking for a while, Mr. Armstrong's phone buzzed, signaling an incoming call. He held it to his ear and began speaking about something, so I turned my gaze toward the convenience store entrance, waiting for Timothy to come out. Just then, right on cue, he appeared and glanced around the parking lot with a troubled look. His eyes darted in every direction, as if searching for something. Did he forget where we parked the car? I rolled down the driver's window and called out, "Timothy, over here." He snapped his head up at the sound and seemed like he would come straight to the passenger side, but instead, he muttered, oh," and began groaning. Something was definitely wrong. His body was trembling even more than before our break. Even from a slight distance, I could see his lips had lost all color. His eyes were wide, as if they might pop out of his head at any moment. As I looked on, stunned, with my mouth slightly agape, Timothy threw out a shocking statement. $300 million. It's too much for me. I can't handle a role that important. What? Wait, Timothy. But before I knew it, he was sobbing and sprinting away. Even random passers-by were caught off guard by the bizarre scene, staring at him as they passed. But Timothy paid them no mind, increasing the distance between us without slowing down. "Timothy, where are you going?" I quickly put the drink I was holding into the cup holder, threw open the door, and prepared to chase after him. Just as I stepped out, Mr. Armstrong's sharp voice called out from behind me. "Wait, Brandon. I just got a call from John, our business associate." It seemed John had requested to move up the meeting time. The destination is just up ahead. I can handle the situation, but it would mean giving up on following Timothy. But, Mr. Armstrong, what about Timothy? Usually, Kevin always wore a calm smile, but even he looked distressed now, his face tense. Mr. Armstrong pressed a hand to his forehead, his face falling. He must have been torn between not wanting to inconvenience the client who'd arranged this opportunity and his concern over Timothy. I pressed my lips together tightly, waiting for his decision. It felt like an endless silence stretched on. It was so quiet it seemed like we were the only ones left in the world, but at last, Mr. Armstrong slowly began to speak. Timothy is a grown man. He's not a helpless child. He looked upset, but he should be able to catch a ride home. And he has a phone. So we can reach him. I doubt he'll run into any real trouble. At that, Kevin interrupted urgently. But he's our interpreter for this deal, isn't he? When it comes to high-level business English, our language skills are limited. Mr. Armstrong's eyes widened, and he groaned, "Oh, that's right." Though he appeared composed, the air around him made it clear he was actually panicking inside. Should we still try to catch up with him? But if we do, then we'll be cutting it too close to the appointment time. While Mr. Armstrong and Kevin deliberated, time continued to tick away mercilessly. Noticing how fast the clock was moving toward the appointment time, Mr. Armstrong's anxiety visibly increased. A faint sheen of cold sweat was beginning to form on his forehead. Watching him like that, an idea suddenly came to me. Maybe this was my chance to repay Mr. Armstrong. The ticking second hand on my watch. The tense voices of Mr. Armstrong and Kevin. And no other solution coming to mind. I tightened my fist subtly, as if gathering my resolve. Mr. Armstrong, I have a suggestion. Both of them flinched at my voice, turning to look at me almost simultaneously. Given how Timothy looked, I doubt he'll be back anytime soon. Why don't you leave this to me? Brandon. Kevin was the first to react. Mr. Armstrong, eyes wide, stared intently at me, forgetting even to blink. I may not speak multiple languages like Timothy, but I can handle English just fine. My words made the two of them exchange glances. Mr. Armstrong briefly glanced at his watch, then nodded as if he had made up his mind. All right, I'll leave the interpreting to you. Relieved that they trusted me in this high-stakes situation, I let out a quiet thank you, feeling a weight lift from my chest. I'm worried about Timothy, but right now, we have no choice but to move forward with the meeting. Leaving the convenience store behind, we headed to the rental conference room near the airport. The clients were already there, and following Mr. Armstrong's lead, we each greeted them and exchanged handshakes. Everything moved quickly, without a moment to catch our breath. I wondered absently if waiting around for them would have made me even more nervous. The client's president was John Smith. When I shook hands with him, he held on tightly, not letting go. It felt like he held my hand far longer than he had with Mr. Armstrong or Kevin. What's going on? As I tilted my head slightly in confusion, he looked me over intently and blurted out in surprise. Are you Brandon? I've been looking for you. I finally found you. What? Both Mr. Armstrong and Kevin let out sounds of shock alongside me. I hadn't expected my name to come up here, of all places. It seemed he knew who I was, but I had no memory of him. As I glanced down, trying to search my memory, John began speaking. We met once when you were in college. There was a hint of nostalgia in his voice, and perhaps a touch of disappointment that I didn't remember. John's words took my breath away. Memories from before I started working as the executive assistant to the president flooded back like a flashback. I'd always loved studying. Or maybe it was more that I had an intense curiosity. I hated the feeling of not knowing something. Just doing the worksheets from school wasn't enough, so I'd buy extra study books myself and never missed a chance to review and prepare. That drive helped me get into Harvard University after high school. The excitement of studying specialized topics thrilled me, and I remember not being able to sleep the night before my first class. A good memory in its own way. Even after starting college, my thirst for knowledge and curiosity for learning never slowed down, and I managed to keep up good grades. One day, in a certain class, we had a group discussion. I'll be the facilitator. I volunteered right away, and since no one objected, I took the lead. The discussion went smoothly, with everyone contributing ideas, making it a productive and enjoyable experience. We even reached a solid conclusion within the time limit, leaving us all with a satisfying sense of completion. John had been watching that discussion. He had connections with people at the university and had taken the opportunity to observe students. Apparently, I had caught his eye. "Hey, do you have a moment?" After the class, he called out to me. When I turned around, I saw an unfamiliar adult standing there. Though he was smiling warmly, I remember being cautious at first, unsure of his intentions. Yes? What is it?" In response to my guarded answer, John replied enthusiastically, "Your skills are truly impressive." I was so shocked by the unexpected compliment that I froze, mouth slightly open. Then he continued, his words spilling out with excitement. "Do you know what you want to do after college?" "Huh? Even though I had left Japan to attend this university, I hadn't really figured out my future plans. I mumbled, unsure of what to say, but I couldn't lie or try to act impressive. When I admitted honestly that I hadn't decided, he responded with an exaggerated, "What? That's practically a loss for the world." That was definitely an overstatement. Not sure whether to laugh or take him seriously, I gave a faint, uncertain smile. "Then how about coming to work for us?" "Us?" John says he runs a company in the US. The business card and introduction materials he rummaged through and handed me bore the name Y Corporation. "A talent like yours would be welcome anytime." With a playful wink, he left me there, mouth agape, practically skipping away with a cheerful stride. It was such a memorable encounter, but as time passed and graduation approached, I had completely forgotten his offer. The business card, once carefully placed somewhere noticeable, had somehow slipped to the back of my drawer. My mind back then was filled with thoughts of going back to Japan. I missed my childhood home, the delicious seafood, and the safe streets. So I decided not to pursue a job in the US and returned to Japan with the Harvard degree I had worked so hard for. Looking back now, I feel a bit embarrassed, but at the time, I was quite full of myself. I thought, surely any company would want someone like me. And had a rather arrogant attitude. As it turned out, my prediction was spot on. Every company wanted someone with a Harvard degree like mine. Each time I mentioned the university's name in a job interview, I saw a shift in the interviewer's expressions. Initially uninterested, they gradually lit up, their eyes sparkling as if they'd stumbled upon a hidden treasure, and I found it amusing. I took satisfaction in feeling like I was the one choosing a company to work for, which now feels like a regrettable part of my past. Even though I received multiple job offers, I stubbornly insisted on only accepting a position that met all my conditions. So it took quite a while to find a company that fit. Once I finally started working in Japan, though, my career was far from smooth. My pride kept me from following my boss's instructions, and my resistance to their way of working left me isolated. I can't stand working with him. He never listens to instructions. He's so overconfident. Glad I didn't have to train him, it would have just been extra stress. I've come across senior employees talking about me in the empty break room more than once or twice. Naturally, none of them were positive, and it was always complaints about me. But I couldn't rein in my inflated pride and ended up blaming everyone else, thinking they just don't understand me. Of course, this led to further alienation from my colleagues, and when I clashed with my boss over a project during my second year, I impulsively quit. Still, my arrogance didn't go away. I assumed I'd find a new job quickly. I did get a few offers, but none matched the conditions of the company I just left. If only I dropped the mindset of being the one doing the choosing, I might have found a job easily, but instead, I went without work for 2 years. During that time, I received invitations to class reunions and messages from old friends asking me to go out, but I turned them all down. I was mortified by the thought of anyone laughing at me as the unemployed Harvard graduate. I'm talented, so why did things turn out like this? After being lost in these thoughts for half a year, I felt something snap in my mind, like a crack splitting through me. Maybe it was the sound of my overblown pride shattering, or maybe my mind finally reaching its limit. Suddenly, I had this idea of applying for jobs as if I only had a high school diploma, to even deceive myself. Although it took time to get hired, one company did bring me to the final interview with the president. That was X Corporation, the very company where I'd eventually work as an assistant. I had no other options left. I had to make it happen. Whatever questions they asked, I'd have to answer flawlessly. With that mindset, I went in, but I was left speechless almost immediately after the interview began. "You're not really a high school graduate, are you?" It was Mr. Armstrong who cornered me with that question right from the start. Of course, a hastily faked resume from an amateur would be exposed immediately. Regret washed over me slowly, and without a second thought, I dropped to my knees and apologized sincerely. "I'm terribly sorry." The only thought in my mind at that moment was, it's over. I couldn't imagine any scenario where I'd still be considered for the position. I was fully expecting him to tell me to leave, but instead, I heard unexpected words. "I get the feeling that you're actually a sincere, hard-working person. Perhaps so diligent that you veered off track and ended up falsifying your background. That's the impression I get from you." There was a kind tone in his voice, completely free of any judgment. Hearing that, my hardened heart softened, and I couldn't stop the tears from streaming down my face. Then, to my shock, Mr. Armstrong smiled and told me he would forgive what I had done and hire me as his assistant. "Thank you so much." I pressed my forehead to the floor once more out of deep gratitude and vowed never to deceive others for my own selfish reasons again. And so, I began my journey as his assistant, which brings me to where I am today. Whenever I recall those days, especially my behavior during the job search, I still get chills down my arms. Yet, over time, I've come to see those experiences as essential. With John's high regard for me, the business meeting went smoothly. We even received the encouraging words, "I'd love to seriously consider this proposal." In the end, he added, "Honestly, I'd like Brandon to join our company, but if you've chosen a place, then I hope you can thrive there." His tone held a familiar blend of nostalgia and loneliness, just like before the business meeting. However, this time, it seemed to carry even more warmth. We shook hands once more, and I drove him to the airport instead of him taking a taxi. Watching him walk away, I felt a sense of closure. A few days after the meeting, Timothy still hadn't shown up at the office since his escape from the convenience store. Just when I began wondering if he would ever return, Mr. Armstrong told me, "Brandon, we managed to get in touch with Timothy." I finished up the research task Mr. Armstrong had assigned me, gathered my laptop and files, and headed to his office. "Excuse me." As usual, I stepped in with a quick greeting, only to find Mr. Armstrong holding the receiver to his ear, saying, "Yes, that's right. Come to my office right away," as he spoke on the internal line. He gestured for me to come in with a wave, so I moved forward and set my things on the central table. A few minutes later, Kevin entered the office after me. Then Timothy arrived, walking with an awkward gait. "Mr. Armstrong, what's this about?" It seemed I was the only one who knew what was about to be discussed. Kevin looked puzzled, and Timothy, his head down, was trembling slightly, clearly feeling uneasy. After looking at each of us in turn, Mr. Armstrong spoke in a solemn tone, "Brandon, please start with your report." His voice wasn't particularly loud, but it filled the room with authority. I nodded slowly and turned to Kevin. "Kevin, have you heard a certain rumor going around the company?" "Oh, rumor?" Caught off guard by my question, he blinked in surprise. As he continued with, "It's regarding a company we could call a rival, Z Corporation," his gaze drifted into the air as if searching his memory. Though, in truth, it was likely just to avoid eye contact with me. Oh, yes, I remember. There's talk that Z Corporation has been attempting to disrupt our work and poach our talent. But it's just a rumor, right? After he finished speaking in one breath, he twisted his lips into a crooked smile. It was an awkward, obviously forced expression. It was unnaturally forced, completely unlike his usual expression. I narrowed my eyes slightly. Yes, that's the one. It would be nice if it were just a rumor. Don't you think so, Timothy? I asked, glancing between Kevin and Timothy. He probably hadn't expected the conversation to suddenly shift to him. Huh? Yes. Timothy's voice broke pathetically as he responded. I sighed quietly and said, unfortunately, it's not just a rumor, as I opened my laptop and played an audio file. A familiar voice filled the room. Just before the meeting, the interpreter is set to run away. Neither I nor Mr. Armstrong can handle advanced English, so if the interpreter leaves, the deal's off. What? No way. The audio was slightly distorted, but it was definitely Kevin's voice. His face went stiff, and his mouth opened and closed silently, struggling to process the words he just heard. He reached out, perhaps to stop me from playing further, but the next words rooted him to the spot as if he'd been nailed in place. Oh, don't worry, I already promised him 30% of the payment. No one can resist money. And as for your company, when I joined Z Corporation, you did promise to give me a better deal than X Corporation, right? It was a twisted, malicious voice, a far cry from the way Kevin usually sounded. To think he'd hidden such a dark side while presenting himself as an ideal employee at X Corporation. Realizing he couldn't escape the truth any longer, both Kevin and Timothy collapsed to the floor, legs trembling like newborn fawns. When questioned, they confessed everything. With the undeniable evidence of the recording, they must have realized there was no point in hiding it any longer. Their voices and expressions conveyed resignation, and they seemed almost ready to give up. Kevin admitted that he'd planned to jump ship to Z Corporation for better treatment, with the additional reward of sabotaging X Corporation's $300 million deal. Timothy, on the other hand, had been instructed to flee right before the meeting, earning 30% of the sabotage fee for doing so. So, the trembling he'd shown at the convenience store was all an act. We're so sorry. Please, forgive us. Both of them bowed deeply, their heads almost hitting the floor as they begged for mercy. Their desperate display reminded me of my own interview with Mr. Armstrong. But the words Mr. Armstrong had for them this time were nothing like those he'd once spoken to me. This is an unforgivable betrayal of the company. His voice was cold and cutting, like a shard of ice. His eyes, devoid of any warmth, were pitch black. Watching the two of them shrink under his gaze, I felt conflicted, painfully aware that I was hardly in a position to judge anyone's lies. In the end, both Kevin and Timothy were fired. I took over the interpreter role temporarily, though I wasn't able to cover any languages other than English. To address this, I planned to work closely with HR to recruit someone new for the role. A while later, the deal with Johns Y Corporation was successfully finalized. Now, to make Mr. Armstrong's goal of that $300 million a reality, I'd need to work hard to build a strong relationship of trust with John. Securing the deal was just the starting line, and the road ahead was sure to be busy. Still, I felt a sense of relief, believing I had finally repaid Mr. Armstrong. Not that he ever seemed to view his generosity toward me as a debt I needed to repay. Even if I were to mention it, he would likely tilt his head in confusion. But that's fine. This is something personal to me. I should have repaid the debt for being hired. Next, I need to start repaying the kindness shown in forgiving the lies I told. With that resolve in my heart, I headed to an important meeting with John, ready to face what lay ahead.